and sold exclusively at your neighborhood Safeway.
Good morning. If one believes mass petitions, and I do, the people of Canada, the vast majority, want capital punishment brought back forthwith. There might be certain restrictions on it, premeditated murder, prison guards and police officers, but they want it back forthwith. Now, we know from Mulroney, Prime Minister Mulroney of our new government, that it is not a high priority issue for his cabinet. But let's see, the last time he spoke to me, what he did in fact say about a debate on bringing back capital punishment.
I am against capital punishment, Jack, but it's the kind of issue where it must come now to a free and an unfettered vote in the House of Commons, because it is so sensitive and it captivates the interest of the Canadian people in such a compelling way.
And it is not high on his priority. But just the other day, we had a word with a few of the BC MPs to get the flavour of them, and I think a vast majority of them are in favour of capital punishment. But let's look at some of our BC spokesmen in Ottawa.
Yes, I've always favoured capital punishment for the protection of police and prison guards. That's been my position since I entered politics.
Capital punishment should be made available to the courts.
In which cases would it be used?
Well, I think I would leave that up to the courts.
I will vote for it. Now, there's a lot of studies going on saying that it doesn't show that it prevents it and that. But this is the one way that we can signal to the nation as a whole that we as a people abhor murder.
Well, my position is exactly the same it's been since I can remember, Harvey, and that's that I'm in favor of it. For first-degree murder, the murder of prison guards and policemen, and for international terrorists.
There's no doubt in my mind whatsoever that well over 80% of the people of North Vancouver, Burnaby, want a return to capital punishment. If the bill comes before Parliament on a free vote, I will be voting in favor of capital punishment.
It is, of course, perfectly clear that each of these MPs are members of the BC Tory caucus. Now, with an 80% preponderance on petitions, perhaps it's correct that I let you meet two members of my panel this morning, Donna Bourne and Vic Dyke. And they're members of the BC chapter of Victims of Violence. Donna Bourne, why do you want capital punishment brought back?
Well, my daughter and her boyfriend were killed very violently, beyond recognition. Then the murderer came back and set fire to them, and he only got 10 years for 2 lives.
He got second-degree murder, 10 years.
Second-degree murder, because we couldn't prove it was premeditated.
When will he be out?
Oh, probably in his early 30s. He has his whole life ahead of him.
Here is Vic Dyke. Why are you a proponent of capital punishment, which some people think is quite uncivilized in the 80s?
Well, Jack, in view of the light sentences given out in the courts, there is no protection for the society. There's no protection for our policemen and the people that protect us. These people are back out on the streets in a very short time only to do it again.
Do you have a personal incident in your life?
Yes, I lost one of my daughters through a murder, very violent, and through plea bargaining in the courts, he was finally sentenced to 5 years.
5 years for somebody's life?
That's right.
You can see how people feel strongly. We're going to now deal with panelists, expert panelists, and involve the audience in their questions to the panelists, and I'll stay as much in the middle as I possibly can. After the break. My first two guests are Dr. John Conrad, who's got 35 years' experience in criminal justice, San Quentin, U.S. Bureau of Prisons, California Correction, all kinds of research positions, visiting professor of criminology at SFU. And then a guy who's very important for the training of policemen in British Columbia, apart from other duties, Dr. Fred Van Fleet, of the Justice Institute, where he is a psychologist, and he kind of does, I think, debriefing for police in crisis situations, and you give personal opinions.
That's correct.
Your personal opinion in this national crisis at the moment.
Well, my personal opinion is that we should review the options that we have available to us now. I don't think that either police or society in general feels that we are being protected. Some of the options I believe that should be examined would be capital punishment for one, but not generally for everybody who necessarily commits a homicidal act. But I believe that anyone who is guilty of the second homicidal act definitely should be reviewed. I would also like to see the use by the judiciary of more consecutive sentences. It seems that a person like Olson, who kills 11 or more individuals, and particularly children, leaves a scar in the society and leaves a certain sense of inadequacy and fear, paranoia, if you like.
But we've got to be satisfied too. We want revenge, don't we? We the people.
I don't believe that revenge is necessarily the important motive here. I believe that it's more important that people get a sense of security.
So I put you to Dr. Conrad, he having told me that yes, he is for capital punishment in certain circumstances, you'd hang Olson.
Or see that he serves 385 years.
But you'd rather see him hanged.
I'm against hanging. I would rather see another form of capital punishment. Put to death.
Dr. Conrad, you're probably one of the most experienced people in this panel, and I'm surprised to find you're an abolitionist.
That's what I am.
Can you make your case?
Yes, I think killing people in cold blood is wrong. There's no way of proving to the general public that killing people in cold blood is wrong by killing people in cold blood. We go around in a circle and we don't break that circle. My second reason is that there's no evidence at all that capital punishment deters the murders we want to deter. The third reason is that we have available prisons which can keep people as long as society needs protection from them.
What about the cost of keeping these prisoners forever? I mean, can't the taxpayer say, look, it's going to cost us $35,000, $45,000 a year to keep this sociopathic killer who hammers nails into the head of little people, of kids, why can't we do them down?
Well, Mr. Webster, that isn't really quite correct. To keep one person in prison for 1 year is not going to cost $25,000. One person in prison is going to cost the taxpayers the amount of money that it costs to feed him and clothe him, and from that could be deducted, if prisons are properly run, the earnings which a prisoner could make in prison industries.
If useful. Now, I thought you might throw some statistics at me, because looking at it bluntly as a presumably objective observer, capital punishment is a deterrent to that killer because he can never, ever do it again. But what about the statistics on capital punishment?
I'm glad you asked that question, because the Canadian statistics are possibly the world's best on to prove my case. My colleague, Dr. Izzat Fatah at Simon Fraser University, recapitulated the statistics on capital punishment and homicide in Canada going back to the very beginning. During the period when capital punishment was, since capital punishment has been abolished since 1962, the homicide rates have been almost stable, varying from 1.5 per 100,000 to 2.5 per 100,000. A very low rate and very enviable from the standpoint of an American. There's been no evidence at all in the statistics that the abolition of capital punishment had any effect on these rates.
Well, that's quite incredible. 1.5 to 2.5 per thousand in Canada. I see the figures from 76 through to 1980, 2.43 to 1.92 in 1980. Right. Why, therefore, are they bringing back capital punishment so freely in the United States? There was a woman put to death by lethal injection the other day.
I think the reason
1,400 on death row somewhere in the States.
There are many reasons. One is that American people have a very high rate of violent crime, much higher than you have.
So maybe
Canada.
you need it if there's more violence.
Yes, and the outcry in America is, let's do something about violence. Well, one thing which our political leaders can do is to advocate the return of the capital punishment. That shows they're doing something. That shows that we're tough on crime. Actually, it doesn't show anything of the kind. We divert tremendous resources to the prosecution of murder cases to the detriment of adequate prosecution of robbery and burglary and the crimes we really ought to be afraid of.
Are you that far apart, you two? Yes, you are.
Well,
because
yes, we are.
you would how far apart are you?
Those statistics that Dr. Conrad is talking about are based on anecdotes, and I don't consider them very scientific. You cannot really measure the deterrence factor toward other individuals. That's a moot argument along with the revenge one that's always brought up. I believe we can argue, as you said, that the use of capital punishment does deter the individual. But there are other considerations, and those considerations are whether society feels protected and whether it's possible to change an individual. And I think what we have to accept is that some individuals cannot be changed. They are so basically and fundamentally evil for whatever reason that if released, they are going to kill again.
Listen, that's sacrilege saying that anybody's evil. Nobody's evil nowadays. They've merely been brought up in the wrong way, and they can, with tender loving care, they can be cured and released to go out on the streets again. We know that. We hear that line all the time.
We're referred to as a civilized society. Unfortunately, I've met a lot of people who aren't quite as civilized as some of us would like to be.
You think, no, you believe that every murderer is capable of conversion to the road of sanity. Is he, Dr. Conrad?
I don't want to give up on anybody, no. I think it's going to be very difficult with a man like Clifford Olson, for example.
But we're not, when you see, I'm not going by statistics, but when you see the type and measure of violence today, more wicked violence, we're getting like the British, killing people in all kinds of different, more esoteric ways.
We also have more weapons, and I think what we're hearing now in the press is a lot of emotional arguments because of the number of police officers who have been killed and prison guards who have been taken hostage.
You can't hardly blame the police, can you?
You can't blame them at all.
Look at this, we had 5 killings in Toronto, in Ontario, in just a few short weeks. Is the reaction, the demand for capital punishment is understandable, isn't it, Dr. Conrad?
The demand is understandable, yes, but it's a demand which I would prefer to resist. I believe civilization must resist it.
I'll take it from you two as I'll take it from Helen. If we have to have capital punishment, what form should be used, Dr. Conrad?
If we have to have capital punishment?
If it becomes a law.
I suppose that the lethal injection is the most humane kind of capital punishment. I think anyone who has witnessed a hanging or witnessed some of an electrocution or an execution in the gas chamber will feel a good deal of repugnance for that kind of an event.
I would also agree, something like lethal injection.
But do away with the rope.
Do away with the rope.
18 minutes to die, and they don't break the necks, they're strangled to death.
Usually.
We're going to our studio audience now to question these panelists after the break. Well, my first two panelists are waiting for questions. Who has a question for either Dr. Conrad or Dr. Van Fleet? Let's have a look around. Well, I'll take you, sir. If you'll stand up, please.
My name's Art Irwin. I have a question for Dr. John Conrad. You're in favor of spending humongous sums of money to try and rehabilitate these criminals. What would you say about spending the same kind of money on a victim such as myself?
In what way are you a victim?
I came home to find my girlfriend, her throat cut, stabbed many times. I tried to roll her over to give her mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Her head almost come off my hand.
I can understand.
And I'm mental. Nobody's looking after me, but you people are quite prepared to spend that money.
That's a good
but
question.
You won't spend nothing on the victims.
Yes, it is a good question.
Yeah, really.
And I don't think the answer is very easy for me or for society in general.
No, but your answer is quite easy to you, that you're prepared to spend money and never give up. But you don't give me any help. And I can't even claim all my expenses off income tax.
Are you baffled on that question, Dr. Conrad? How about you, Dr. Van Fleet?
And I don't believe there's any difference between first-degree or second-degree murder. Dead is dead.
I agree in that, too.
How about you, Dr. Van Fleet?
Well, again, I believe that victims should be compensated far more than they have been in our society.
They've been ignored up to now.
They have been ignored.
Gentlemen, here's the question.
Yes, my name is Dan Einerson. I have always felt that society in the last 25 years has become very soft. I don't know why. There are probably reasons for it. But I firmly believe that the murderer should be given every chance that he gives his victim. Common sense tells us that mad, sad, or glad, as far as the murderer is concerned, The results of his act don't change. And so why should he be given all of this wonderful consideration by people? And I think that the sooner we come back to a normal state of discipline, if our universe was to operate to the extent of discipline that we are operating as far as this capital punishment is concerned, the universe would go berserk.
Okay, that's well said. He's obviously in favor. I don't think there's any comment required on that one, is there? Not much you can say to that.
Well, Mr. Anderson, nothing is going to bring back the victim of a murder. We can all deplore, with you and this other gentleman can deplore and grieve over the loss of the victim of a murder. Nobody is saying that murderers can or necessarily will be rehabilitated. All I am saying is that we don't need capital punishment to deter murder. We can, and that 15 to 20, 25 years or a whole life in prison is a severe enough punishment.
Okay, thank you. Madam, you wanted to quit. Your name, please.
Kathy McKee. To Dr. Conrad, can you give me any idea of how many people that you can let back out in the streets? Can you give me any assurances whatsoever that they will not murder again?
I've known probably more murderers than anybody in this room. I've only known 2 out of the hundreds I've known who have been released and gone out to murder again. Out of, I'd estimate maybe about 200.
Maybe you have a better system in the United States than we have here, because there seem to be many cases that climb up my back of people on mandatory supervision or parole with known mental conditions who've gone out and killed again.
Mr. Webster, I think that this is up to the to Parliament and the legislature to develop laws which will assure that murderers and people who are really dangerous to society are kept under lock and key for a much longer period of time.
Dr. Van Fleet, you must know what the police think here. I'll come back to you. What the police think here about the mandatory supervision and the parole killers who've been on the streets.
Well, of course, I think that what Dr. Conrad says about very few murders repeating their crime actually can be borne out statistically, but that doesn't help the victim or the parent of the victim when somebody is released and does kill again, and I don't believe that should be allowed to happen.
That's very true. I unfortunately had the experience. My mother was just murdered 6 months ago, and the fellow had a good chance to do it once before, and you realize that he is not even responsible for his actions. Do you also realize that society won't even bring it up in the courts of his previous actions? And he was let out to do again without any supervision whatsoever. The man was let out of an institution and he was put right back out in the street, and he didn't even have to see anybody. The only person he saw was my mother, who he stabbed. Now, can you tell me where you could justify that?
No, that can't be justified.
Can't be justified. Mrs. Olson, thanks very much for sharing. Mrs. McKee, for sharing your experience with us. My goodness gracious me.
I have a question.
Sorry. Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Conrad. You stated that statistics show that there hasn't been an increase in the last number of years, but how come in the federal statistics in 1961 there were 185 murders, in 1974 there were 545, which is a 295% increase since the abolition of capital punishment.
Where did you get your figures?
These are from a federal government statistic.
In 1961, 185, 1974, 545.
Right.
Would that be a population ratio difference?
It probably is.
No?
We haven't had a 294% increase in population since 61.
No, we haven't even had 100% since 61.
I don't know where you got those statistics. I'm going by the statistics my colleague Dr. Fatah.
Yeah, these are federal government statistics on murders.
Mm-hmm. No, thanks. I didn't get your name.
Harry Hildebrandt.
Harry Hildebrandt. This young gentleman here, your name?
Good morning, Jack. My name is Manny Alexio. I have a question for Dr. Van Fleet. A little while ago, you said facetiously that we should put murderers away for about 385 years. First of all, I liked your comment. A little while back, there was a very, very good informative show that I was watching where they were explaining, interviewing murderers and rapists and all this stuff. They were asking them what they thought of life, and they were saying they were having a ball. They were having a great time. They were also saying that...
You mean in jail?
In jail. Oh, yeah. And they were also saying that something towards... They were making money. They were using lawyers. They were becoming lawyers themselves in the in the jails and stuff. And
But
they were
what's
having
the
a
question?
great time. I'd like to know what you think of that.
You mean he wants to know what you think of the educational opportunities and what the public regards as pampering with 9-hole golf courses here and there in jails?
Well, I don't think if anybody has spent much time in prison, as both Dr. Conrad and I have, that you see people really being pampered the way the public might like to believe. But I think your question represents, again, the very real concern that we are not protecting society. In fact, our legal system is structured to protect property far more than it is people against violence. You know, it's been one of the ironies that's always struck me that if somebody brings some marijuana across the border, there's a minimum of 7 years. If somebody brings a weapon across the border, there is no such minimum. And I don't know how many people have died from smoking pot. The fact is, our laws are not geared to protect people. And when I said that 385 years, I think people would feel a lot more secure knowing that Olson was serving consecutive life sentences and would never be released.
Right. Don't you think that putting somebody away for 385 years would cost us more money, especially considering the fact that they have done this over and over again, the same crime?
In terms of the financial cost, there's no argument. But I think, again, in the best effort to be as humane as we can, one would have to question whether or not serial killers would be executed. But, you know, the fact is most of the homicides that occur are fairly impulsive acts.
Thank you. We'll be back after the break with 2 more experts in the field and more questions from the panel on Webster. Next, I have 2 lawyers. Don't hold that against them. 2 authors. Don't hold that against them. They're not flogging books today. And they are David Williams, QC, who is a lawyer, advocate of return of capital punishment. And then we have a man you've seen on the program with great effect from time to time, Michael Jackson, professor at the Faculty of Law at UBC, who is a well-known civil libertarian who has done many important studies into the effect of our system of justice. And I'm going to put you both unfair questions as if you were in the witness stand. Are you, Michael Jackson, in favor of the retention of capital punishment only for the Olsons of the world?
Do I have to answer that yes or no, or can I?
I'd rather you answered it yes or no.
No, I'm against it.
You're against capital punishment in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, I am.
Now, how about you, if I can, David Williams? How about you? I think you're...
I'm definitely in favor of it, Jack. Forgive my voice. I've got a bad cold, and if I'm not speaking loudly enough, will you bellow at me, please?
Your voice is fine.
I'm definitely in favor of capital punishment for some forms of crime, Jack. Premeditated murder, murder committed or homicide committed during the course of a violent crime like burglary, armed robbery, rape, or as it used to be called, now sexual assault. That's incidentally, that's typical of our dilution of values, I think, of society, that rape has been translated into sexual assault. You know, murder will next be physical assault by definition. I'm in favor in those cases, not necessarily for prison guards and police officers either. I don't see why citizens shouldn't have the same protection of the law as is extended to police guards and sheriffs. But my view is that in those cases, there should be capital punishment, not hanging. I think this whole argument is bedeviled by, in fact, your opening lead in this program said, would you bring back the rope?
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would bring back the rope, but a lot of people would bring back execution by some more humane method. But if you're not going to impose or carry out capital punishment, Jack, in whatever form of execution it may be, then life imprisonment should be life imprisonment, period, forever.
Michael Jackson, take him apart.
Well, the first question you asked me, would I be in favor of capital punishment for the Olsons? Certainly, with the Olson events, I have rethought my position. I guess 10 years ago, like a lot of people, my position as a so-called progressive was against capital punishment. I never really thought about it that carefully. It was just part of the intellectual, cultural baggage I sort of brought with me. Olson caused me to think very hard about it. I've listened to people from victims of violence, some of your audience here, and you can't but feel the strength and the hurt they've gone through. And when you have a man like Mike Olson, a serial killer, I have no great feelings that that man deserves to live. But that led me to start exploring the implications. And what I find is that with capital punishment, I could say killing Olson would not deprive me of any sense of security in terms of my right to live. But then we find that some people say we should kill people who kill policemen. We should kill people who kill in the course of rape, people who are terrorists. But everyone has a shopping list, and all of a sudden, the idea of killing becomes a very wide net in which a number of people are brought in who I don't think should. I have worked now with a number of people.
In other words, you're saying that if Olson had been put down, it wouldn't have given you any mental problem, any emotional problems, but you still wouldn't have advocated it.
I wouldn't, because it seems to be that once you accept the idea that
it
you
opens
can
the door.
kill, you open the door, and everyone, with very good reason. I understand the police saying we want to be protected. I understand people who have actually been victimized saying we want to be protected. Everyone has a position, and it's understandable, but it leads to a wider and wider net. The other thing which I want to point out is this, that we seem to think that if we reintroduce capital punishment, everyone who ought to be hung or executed in whatever clinical way we want to do it will be hung or executed.
Hanged is the right word for it.
Purist, hanged. We accept your correction, David Williams.
Right.
What we know from the experience of every society which has authorized capital punishment is that not everyone who ought to be executed is executed. The Supreme Court of the United States, when it held that the death penalty was unconstitutional, didn't do so because it said it's immoral. It didn't do so because it says we have no right to retribution. It didn't do so because it said it has no deterrent impact. All of those things are debatable.
But it changed its tune. The court has changed its tune. The United States Supreme Court has changed its tune.
What the Supreme Court said was that it was unconstitutional and it was cruel and unusual punishment because it was almost freakish in its application. It was applied against the poor, against the blacks, against the disenfranchised. And that has been our experience in Canada.
Fair enough, but I'm surprised nobody has raised the fact. I've heard people say, and somebody will say this morning, better that one innocent man be hanged than 1,000 killers go to the gallows.
That's a Victorian notion which is gone in terms of modern society. As Dr. Conrad said this morning, the societies, I think that notion is gone. One can no longer, why should we expect perfection in the administration of the criminal justice system than in any other sphere of human activity?
But you can't take away a man's life by accident.
No, but obviously there are going to be mistakes.
And they're going to hang.
Certainly.
And so they should be, just by accident.
And if the odd mistake occurs, then mistakes occur in other spheres of human activity.
Well, let me...
there's nothing immoral about that. It's inevitable.
Practical.
It's a risk that we have to run. We have to do the best we can.
They are sacrifices on the road to safety.
Well, that's right.
Well, let's deal with that.
One has to accept that.
I'm acting now for two people who were convicted of murder. Had the death penalty been involved, one of them almost certainly would have been hung, hanged, whatever.
He would be dead anyway, yes.
She would be dead. The other person was convicted of a murder of a prisoner, and that would, I think, be in some people's shopping list of appropriate candidates for death penalties, someone who was killed in the prison system.
Second time round.
I am trying to get both of them new trials on the basis that I believe that they were wrongly convicted. Now,
good point.
Now, Jack, may I
let me finish. You say it's we just have to contemplate those risks. Those risks should only be contemplated if you can answer these questions. One, we will get substantial benefits as a society in terms of our peace and security if we incur those risks. They're inevitable. They will happen. We have to get benefits. What are the benefits? Will people in fact feel more secure? Will they in fact be more secure by having the death penalty? Given that the death penalty will not be applied to everyone thinks it should be applied to, but almost in a random basis, some Crown Counsel who are against the death penalty will plea bargain. Some prisoners will accept, as someone's already mentioned, a plea for second-degree murder to avoid execution. Some juries are hanging juries, some are not.
Some judges go for the rope.
That's right.
Don't.
Some cabinets will go for it and they won't. What we'll have is a system which is, again, as the United States points out, freakish in its application. Will people in fact feel more secure with that kind of system? Almost by lottery, picking out every 10th or 20th person and saying, you shall hang, knowing that maybe we're making a mistake.
Okay.
I don't think that's acceptable.
Questions from the studio audience now to David Williams and to Michael Jackson after the break. The panelists for these questions are, of course, Michael Jackson from UBC and David Williams, lawyer and author. Matter of fact, he wrote The Hanging Judge. Begbie, that was. It wasn't somebody else.
That wasn't exactly the title, but it was the man.
Close enough. Up you go. Your question, please, to the panel.
Hi, I'm Richard Rainey, and I'd just like to ask Mr. Williams, I mean, sir, it offends me that you're willing to accept the fact that innocent people are going to be executed for crimes they didn't commit. I personally don't think I'll feel too secure knowing that I can be picked up on the street and hanged for a crime that I didn't commit, sir.
Okay, good question.
Yep, good question. There have been very few demonstrated instances in this country of people who are convicted when really innocent. Now, that is not to say that such instances have not happened, but very few have been demonstrated. One recently was the Marshall case in Nova Scotia, and then there was this chap who was not convicted of murder, incidentally, Fox, but that may have been a wrong man being convicted. These things happen. Life is not fair.
Justice is not perfect.
Justice is not perfect. We have to do the best we can. And if innocent people occasionally suffer, that's simply a risk that society has to accept.
Michael, anything you want to say to that, Michael? Do you excoriate your colleague?
Only to say that risks sometimes are inevitable, where we are satisfied that the benefits are so great that we can't afford to go without them.
Fair enough. Young lady, your name?
Susan Alexio. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Williams. You stated that you would be in favor of capital punishment for premeditated murder. Do you not agree that capital punishment is in fact planned, deliberate, and in some cases to some degree ceremonial, and therefore is premeditated in itself? And therefore, collectively, if we believe in capital punishment, that we are proving that we do not abhor murder, but that in fact we condone it. And in my opinion, the fact that Clifford Olson supports capital punishment is no surprise since he's an experienced murderer himself.
Yes, well, let's not...
Very good point.
Let's not have this discussion bedeviled by Clifford Olson. I mean, his name pops up so often. I mean, he's an extreme case.
He's the classic example.
And a multiple killer. But I'm talking about first-time killers. I think first-time killers should be executed if they plan their crime and intend to commit murder. And I should have said earlier, Jack, that I would also, if we do have life imprisonment, which means what it means, that we should give those people an option within their term of life imprisonment. If they get fed up with being stuck away for 35 years, let them elect to be executed by some form of choice, some means of their choice. Give them an option, as they do in some states in the United States.
What do you think of that, Michael Jackson?
Well, I don't think it's a very valid point.
Well, Olson would like it.
Let me just deal with this question of capital punishment for all first murders. One of the things which I experience from working with people in prison, some people can say I'm a bleeding heart, but I go into prison and I work with people. I try and deal with their legal problems. I try and deal with the problems of what the state does to them without condoning what they have done to us. The separate points. And I find more and more the people I talk to are people in their 20s, people who have committed murders. I find more and more they're people who have been through a succession of foster homes. I find more and more they're people who have never been socialized in the ways which the rest of us are. Now, some people say that that characterizes some aspects of our society in which we do not have social justice. It offends me deeply to think that we will take those people who, for whatever reason, have not had available to them the kinds of measures of social justice we all want, and say, we will then kill you. The idea of capital punishment for many people is a justice issue. They think that it's just and right that people who kill should be killed. I understand that justice point, but it seems to me to be the very epitome of injustice to take people who, more so than any other group, are the victims themselves of social injustice and say, we will demonstrate to you how just we were by put you to death.
That would bring us back to U.S. Supreme Court business where only the poor, the blacks, and the underprivileged get hanged.
And that's the reality.
Jack, I don't think, again, I said a moment ago, let's not bedevil the thing with Olson. Let's not bedevil this issue with the experience of the United States Supreme Court, as Michael and Dr. Conrad seem to think is of some validity in this country. I don't think the American experience has much to do with this country.
Fair enough. Here's another question from
Mrs. Jean Gibson. I represent Victoria on the National Parole Board. I'm a citizen voter on the National Parole Board, Federal National Parole Board. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Williams. What do you think of the 25-year sentence? It was a real trade-off for capital punishment. What do you think of the people spending 25 years in jail without any hope of parole?
What do I think of it?
Oh, Mr. Jackson.
Oh.
Well, one of the things which occurs to me is that this country has been very hypocritical in relation to its approach to the death penalty. We didn't execute anyone for some 15 years before we abolished it. The average period of time spent by the person convicted of capital murder, which was commuted to a life sentence, was 13 years. In 1977, we doubled that period to 25. The point which that gives rise to is that a lot of people have talked this morning about capital punishment is necessary because it will demonstrate that we are tough on crime, that we're prepared to do something. A number of people have said, based upon their own personal experiences, that sentences are too lenient, the courts are soft on crime. With all respect to those people, and I can understand their personal experiences and why you might think that way, if you look at the global situation, sentences are going up. I mean, the very best evidence of that is that in 1977, we doubled from 13 to 25 years the amount of time a capital murderer
So therefore,
will
I
serve.
gather your answer to Jean Gibson's question is you think it's an excessive amount of time for a life sentence.
Well, again, yes, let me go back to why I think that. I have spent time with men convicted of first-degree murder. One man in particular who was convicted of killing a police officer. He was trying to escape. He was doing a very short prison sentence. He escaped. He was apprehended by a police officer. He pulled a gun, all of which is deplorable. He thought the police officer would simply back off. The police officer was courageous. He didn't. He was shot. The man pled guilty to first-degree murder. Now, he was 19 at the time. He told me in his prison cell that he knows that there are people in prison who are killers. He doesn't see himself as a murderer. He understands why he was sentenced to long imprisonment for killing. He understands that's murder. He doesn't see himself as someone who is prepared to kill.
Are you happy with the answer, though?
Can I make a couple of statements
Yes, please.
about parole? This lady over here mentioned parole. Anyone who is sentenced to life imprisonment does not come out on mandatory supervision ever, because they are on parole for the rest of their life, and they are therefore supervised for the rest of their life. So rest assured that anybody that comes out on parole, any murderer that comes out on parole, is supervised for the rest of their life. They are not on mandatory supervision. I want that understood. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Why, speaking of this, why shouldn't people convicted of life imprisonment be placed in the general prison population?
Well, you know perfectly well why they shouldn't be placed in the
Of course
general.
I do. But why should society subsidize
What
their
you're saying
fears
is
at the hands of their fellow inmates?
What you're saying is most astonishing. You're using the old Olson line. If Olson had been put in the general population of Ocala and not protected and had his complaints investigated by the ombudsman, he would have been killed instantly among the general population.
Right, Dr.
Am I correct?
That's right. Dr. Conrad this morning said that it cost, he disputed the cost of maintaining a prisoner at something like $25,000. It's something like $60,000. And largely it's so much because of keeping about 250 people in protective custody.
David Williams, surely you're not suggesting that we should impose capital punishment by taking particularly obnoxious sociopathic killers and leaving it to the prison population to put them down?
But if society is not prepared to do it, we may have to leave it to the inmates.
Oh, well, isn't that a dreadful attitude, Michael Jackson?
Well, I think it is.
Isn't that abominable?
What about the House of Commons, where all the MPs...
We'll be back to you in a little while, Claire. Well, mind you, all of us said that, in all fairness to everybody said, why all this pussyfooting about Olson? Why not put him in the general population and the boys will put him down? But of course, we can't as a society tolerate that, and I'll be back with different panelists after the break. My two panelists, we've switched again, are first Bruce Batchelor, who is a specialist on the death penalty for that august international body, Amnesty International. And he is against capital punishment. In favor of capital punishment is the man who was, without the slightest shadow of a doubt, the best beat cop in the last 40 or 50 years in Vancouver's police department, Bernie Smith. Bernie Smith could break up a crowd of obnoxious, sometimes drinking people and whatnot, with a wave of his hand and a couple of well-timed jokes, but he was also known as a bit of a tough guy when he had to be. Fair introduction, Bernie.
Thank you very much, sir.
It is a fair introduction.
Absolutely, sir. You
Now,
read it just like I wrote it.
Tell me, Bernie, you obviously are in the classic mold of the old-fashioned policeman who wants capital punishment for everybody who does a killing. Is that correct?
No, sir, that's not true.
Tell me your views.
I would say that most of my professional career as a policeman, I was not in favor of capital punishment for the reasons that have been discussed here already. But there are several things that have happened in the past 10 years that have certainly made me change my mind. First of all, I think that the people of this country should recognize that the laws were not designed to protect the crooks, but were designed to protect the innocent people of this community, and we're failing. I don't think capital punishment is a form of revenge, it's a form of protection, and that's what it's designed for. I don't think that we put people in prison because it's a deterrent, and if it was a deterrent, there wouldn't be so many recidivists. I think they're better off in there than most people are outside. I think that we have to recognize that the laws are made to protect this society, and the people that refuse to accept their responsibility and live within the guide rules of the society must be put away so we, the weak and defenseless, can be protected.
In other words, you're totally rejecting the idea that because you hang somebody or put them away for 25 years, that you are extracting revenge. You're extracting, the judges always say the first object of sentence is to protect society from the depredations of a criminal like this, right?
Revenge would be taking him around the back alley and beating him to a pulp. That's revenge. Unlawful. That's revenge. But when it's done within the law to protect the society, that's exactly what it's designed for.
Are we in the kind of society here, Bernie, and you've kept well in touch, where conditions on the street are such that we really need to get an awful lot tougher than we are now? We live in a fairly quiet part of the world, British Columbia.
I would like to think that we live in the last peaceful city in the world, but if we keep on going the way we are now, we won't be able to say that next year. I can't help but bring one point. Dr. Conrad, whom I have much respect for, said that he's known many murderers, and only 2 that he ever knew went out and committed a crime again. Maybe the rest of the people are those who are responsible for the murders we have yet to solve. And that really scares me. When these lawyers stand up and say, I defended 10 bandits and 10 murderers, and only 1 was convicted, that means that there's 9 murderers running around this community.
Well, maybe 7 or 8.
Maybe
some of them might
more.
have been innocent. But
oh, I find that hard to believe.
In our legal
and those
society...
people that they have found, like the last case, I forget the guy's name, was it Fox or something?
Yeah, Norman Fox.
Hey, if this community did to me in reverse what they did to him, we would never allow it. Imagine taking somebody off the street, having a secret tribunal that no one has access to, and saying, you're going to go to jail for 10 years. We do the exact reverse and let the guy out. No, that's not right in our society.
Bruce Batchelor, Amnesty. How can you stand up against such a forthright policeman who wants to protect society, and if somebody has to hang for it, so be it?
Well, I'd like to offer an international perspective just for a moment, which may get us away from the hothouse of justice and judicial maladministration. Amnesty International stands uncompromisingly against the death penalty. We believe that it's a violation of the right to life, which was guaranteed by the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The right to life is the most sacred of all the rights that human beings hold, and it's conferred by birth and cannot be taken away by the acts of a state. It's our contention that it's the duty of the state to preserve life and to make the quality of life better. The unfortunate issue for Amnesty International is that we are forced into domestic debates on judicial maladministration in Canada, which we acknowledge to be one of the principal issues causing public unrest at this moment. We would like to see Canada and other countries that have abolished capital punishment remain in that camp, because we believe that internationally Canada can have a strong voice in countries that are not as fairly run.
If it goes with clean hands and says we don't hang people.
Precisely. And we will admit that the judicial procedures in Canada would be, let's say, more fair than in other countries, but we would like to point out all those countries where, for instance, executions can take place the same day that sentence is passed down, families are not allowed to see the condemned person before they die, and so on. A voice needs to be raised against that, and we'll put ourselves in that role.
Yeah, of course, in international negotiations, say you're trying to save the life of somebody who's been tortured and arrested by some Central American republic, you've got to be able to go and say, look, we don't kill people, you shouldn't either, let them go.
Exactly. Very exactly.
Well, can we fit these two things together when we're talking so emotionally about the situation in Canada? Is your situation, You're not two-faced about it. I mean, for instance, you don't believe we should have capital punishment inside here just for ourselves, do you?
No, there are plenty of reasons why we shouldn't, a lot of which have been covered this morning.
It's very hard to argue against a reasonable man who believes in the sanctity of life when you and I might be advocating stringing somebody up or giving them a lethal injection. Isn't it, Bernie?
Well, Mr. Webster, it's very difficult to debate with a man like this who speaks so soft and gentle. I guess I should bring my voice down.
No, you shouldn't. No, you shouldn't.
I must admit I'm really
difficult.
emotional. Yeah, it's very difficult. But I think that if we have a system whereby the jury hears all the evidence firsthand, they know exactly what's going on, they have the feeling of the crime as it took place, as it unfolds in the courtroom, then they're the ones that should decide what should happen.
You and I know perfectly well that what happens in a criminal trial, and Michael Jackson referred to earlier on, depends very much on the caliber of the lawyer, the caliber of the judge, the determination of the prosecution, and whether or not the accused goes on the witness stand. You and I have known people who are hanged who should never have been hanged because they went on the witness stand, right?
Not necessarily. The reason I say that some of those people we spoke about before shouldn't have been executed because of the circumstance surrounding each individual case. And the jury should have had all that opportunity to hear that. They're the ones that should have decided. But in those days, the judges had no choice. But once the man was convicted of murder, there was no choice.
The black cap. Yeah. Questions to this panel on Amnesty and on Bernie Smith, the policeman, ex-policeman, after the break. Well, now, you just heard my panelists, Bernie Smith, ex-Vancouver City Police, and Bruce Batchelor of Amnesty International. And they didn't quite jibe, but there is a room in this debate for someone who takes the kind of global, quiet, civilized view that if you're going to stop executions elsewhere, you must go to them as a nation with clean hands. Question, ma'am.
Yes, I have a question for Bernie.
Your name first?
Fiona Lomax. I'd like to know what the difference to you would be between killing a prison guard or a police officer, what the difference is between killing them or killing a regular citizen.
During my time as a professional policeman, that law was brought into effect, and I totally and strongly disagree with it. In those days, I was big, I was strong, I was armed, and Claire would think I was dangerous, but I was well qualified to protect myself. I thought that the little children and the women should have got first choice. I don't agree with that type of legislation.
You don't want preferential treatment for police officers. You do for prison guards, because after all, the guy's doing life and he's in the bucket. He does a second killing for free, doesn't he?
Well, that's beside the point. I think the guards are well qualified to protect themselves, and they should be more trained, more professional, and same as the policemen. The more difficult the challenge, the more education you have to do the job.
They know what they're getting into when they take the job.
Absolutely, I agree with you, my dear.
Good. Now, this lady here, ma'am, you have a question?
Yes, my name is Pam Simmons. I'd like to address my question to the gentleman from Amnesty International. I had a girlfriend who was killed by a fellow who sat down in his apartment in the East End and planned the crime. When he committed the crime, he went in there very well protected for himself. Mr. Smith may know the case I'm quoting. But my friend had a right to life, the same as these murderers you say have a right to life which you cannot take away. The judge in the case reduced the sentence to 10 years, although the psychiatrist at the trial admitted that if let out on the street again, this fellow could commit the same crime. 2 years from now, he could be back on the streets. I don't think that fellow has a right to live. I really don't.
The question to you is the right to life ever taken away by a person's own actions? Long way around with capital punishment. I can understand Pat, isn't it?
Pam.
Pam, I can understand Pam's attitude on it. Sure, you can too.
He gave away his right to life when he committed that crime, in my opinion.
Well, that's a definition that you have put on his acts. That's a definition that you have taken unto yourself as a private citizen. That definition has been used by the state previously. Similar definitions have been used for crimes like petty theft, shoplifting. In other countries of the world, you may have evil thoughts about the state and undergo the death penalty. In all these countries, people are offended by those crimes they regard as capital crimes. The question really is any kind of crime a capital crime? Is civilization moving in a certain direction, as it seems to have been over the last 200 years? towards a condition where capital crimes do not exist. The confusion in Canada, and regretfully for people like myself and Amnesty International who could frankly be doing better things, is that very genuine concerns by people like yourself, which you cannot wash away or minimize the concerns you have. These concerns are issues of Canadian judicial administration. And incidentally, I'd like to draw out that we have a new constitution in this country. And in the United States, after the constitutional challenge to the death penalty in 1972, it was 11 years before any execution took place.
Well, it's another fact. I'm sure Michael Jackson might answer this question right now. Can capital punishment be challenged under the Bill of Rights as on one of the basic provisions of the Bill of Rights?
I think if it's introduced, there's no question it will be challenged as a violation of Section 12 of the Charter, and it would be many years, I think, before anyone was ever executed, if at all.
That will run shivers of horror through this audience, which I gather is preponderantly pro-capital punishment, because of the fact that we pass a law and we give the rights to damned judges to change our law.
Well, the debate here actually will be replicated in the courts, because the challenge will be that the taking of life by the state is cruel and unusual punishment unless it is demonstrably justifiable in a free and democratic society. And so the courts will hear evidence. What is the purpose? What is the benefits of capital punishment? And do they outweigh the costs? So this debate will in fact be replicated in the courts and will go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada.
That doesn't make you any happier either, does it, Pam?
No, Mr. Webster, it doesn't.
Thank you for your participation. Now, next question, please. I've lost, my question is here. Forgive me, I got lost. Up on your feet, please. Your name.
Yes, it's Norman Frizzle. I'd like to address the attitude of Bernie Smith. It seems to me he identified his own attitude earlier as a bit emotional, and it seems to me that in these days when just the very fact that we're considering so seriously the reintroduction of capital punishment, that's exactly the atmosphere you don't want to introduce it into.
You mean to say he's being emotional and a little bit rednecked?
And I think many of the audience are. They have good reason to be, of course.
You are against capital punishment?
No, I'm not particularly. But my attitude is that when you're considering it in an emotional state, then you're not considering rationally.
Well, Mr. Webster, with all due respects, I think those people who are opposed to capital punishment, by and large, have played on the emotions of the general public at large. The old story, about that innocent man. That's all. We always hear that about those people that may be convicted that haven't committed the crime.
Well,
that's an emotional issue.
Do you have a question, sir? Your name?
Frank Hazelton. What about the family members of police officers and other things like that? What about their emotion,
You're talking about the emotions of the victim again?
Yes. What about them?
Address that?
Every time with the murders, the 5 murders in Ontario, my brother's head of a SWAT team there. I sit, my family sits, and wait to see if my brother is one of those people that was shot.
How do you answer that, Bruce Batchelor of Amnesty?
Amnesty International.
We always have to, if we are going to make any mistakes at all, we should make them on the side of compassion, on the side of charity, on the side perhaps of spending money on the possibility that we might be wrong. Canadian society, frankly enough, has never been known for compassion. And if we need to create new levels of compassion for those who have been victimized, for the relatives of police officers who have given their life in the service of society, then we should get down to the business of developing that compassion and possibly paying for it.
But I think it's generally agreed that we don't do much to look after the families of victims of any kind of crime, far less brutal murders. I'll be back after the break. On the podium now is Claire Colhoun of the prisoners' rights groups. And Claire Colhoun has annoyed the devil out of me over the years. She is the most persistent advocate for her cause that this country has ever seen. And the annoying thing about Claire is that she often turns out to be right. After I've brushed her off from time to time, she'll come up with something like the Norman Fox case, in which the Crown admitted that it inadvertently convicted a man for a crime he didn't do. And sitting beside Claire in this section is Donna Bourne. I remember Donna at the beginning of the program. She lost her daughter, right, Donna?
Yes.
And her daughter's boyfriend.
Yes.
Brutally murdered.
Yes.
So I've paired you up there with Claire, just so you've got a moment or two to express yourself in a little more detail. What do you say to all these people like Claire and Michael Jackson who say, we can't ever take a human life? You tell them what you really think about this attitude which says, oh no, you mustn't kill anybody, even though half my family's been wiped out.
I don't feel that the victim was given a chance. She wasn't given a trial, appeals, etc., etc. I don't believe that execution is murder.
And he only got how much?
10 years.
10 years.
I believe while he's in jail, he is not in the situation that made him do what he will do. He's very clever. I believe when he's back in society, if he's put in the same situation, he will do it again, and someone else will have to go through what I've gone through.
And you make no bones about it that he should have been tried, sentenced, and executed for the murder of your daughter.
Yes.
Now, in the face of that, Claire, a very nice woman sitting next to you, Claire,
we know each other.
who's gone through agonies of the damned, and yet along will you come and you'll say, short sentences, no capital punishment.
But you see, this is where the complete distortion takes place. I don't think there's anybody in this room, and they've expressed themselves that way, that doesn't have complete sympathy and understanding. But I think the call for a person who is lost.
They've forgotten about the day after the event.
Not at all.
When the trial is
Not
over, the
at all.
files are put away and that's it.
But the point is that what they are calling for, when they call for capital punishment, is a cry for more security. And they're calling for revenge. And neither of those things are going to bring back the person. So why don't we separate the issue? No one is against the horror of someone being killed as they have been. All I think some of us
everyone is against the horror of someone being killed.
All I'm trying to say is that the approach to solving the problem is different. And I think that by advocating another killing isn't going to solve it. Let me be very concrete. We can't bring the person back. I mean, this is a fact. Right. We want to prevent it from happening again. Right. But I think the victim would stand to gain far more, and perhaps this might be a far better deterrent, that a person knew if they were going to victimize anybody, whether it be robbery or murder, they're going to spend the rest of their life supporting the family of that victim.
How did you feel as a victim's relative after that? What happened to you? What was done to give you consolation or comfort? Or
Absolutely nothing.
All right, that would be a solution.
One thing I want to say, I do get very tired of hearing that it won't bring my daughter back and that it's revenge. Nobody knows that better than me. I have a little bit of revenge, but I do feel sorry for the person that killed my daughter. It's a waste of his life too. What I'm saying is protection of society.
Protection of society,
yes.
not revenge, protection of society.
Yes, and this we're agreed on, because the fact remains whether he does or doesn't come out in whatever year from parole, there is no reliable way of predicting what a person is going to do.
I thought your principal case this morning was going to be, one of your cases was going to be, that there are so many cases of unjust conviction of people for whom there wasn't clear and positive proof. Is that not your strongest
well,
case?
Give me time to get to that,
Oh.
because I think there too we see an example. There's no question about feeling sorry for victims, but if we're going to measure a life for a life, and first of all, I don't accept the numbers game that Bernie or other people have played. So what if we have an innocent victim? The question has to be, what if you're that victim? And we'll have the same argument. But getting back to what we do about dealing with having to cope with people that are going to commit the crime when they shouldn't. I think, again, we're looking at a case where it is revenge. I think we're looking at a case where we cannot solve the issue as it is now. And, in fact, we're looking at a situation where no one seems to care about the possibility of extending the nature of the crime by taking an innocent life for nothing.
What do you mean extending the nature of the crime?
Because all you're doing is perpetrating an atmosphere of killing, you know, and people are talking about we want Canada to look tough.
If you went home tonight and found somebody killing somebody near and dear to you, you'd be perfectly entitled to kill them then and there, wouldn't you?
Not at all. I would try to stop it as best I could.
Wouldn't you kill them?
No. Why would I want to kill them? What would that solve? You don't solve killing by killing.
It would execute the killer forthwith, wouldn't it?
It would, but you're not solving any problem by saying that that person may or may not have killed again. That's all conjecture.
All right, how many people are in the jails that you know of who are falsely convicted for life of murder?
Well, I can't give you a number, but I tell you, we could have a program every month on it. I guarantee you that.
I know, because so much the whole system of justice is based on the required proof. And while the guilty person may be as guilty as all sin, the fact that you can't prove it is the handicap.
All right, well, how about the other way around? There were statistics that came out of the United States that said about 12% of executions were in error, 40% of them were black people. So we're not necessarily killing justly.
Would you have felt safer? I think you're over the crisis now, but would you have felt safer at the time if your daughter's killer had been executed?
I would have felt safer if he wasn't out on bail, for one thing.
What do you mean out on bail?
He was out on bail. He killed 2 people very violently, beyond recognition, came back and set fire to them, and was out on bail a week later.
You're joking.
No, but I'm not joking.
Did he kill anybody else?
He was brought in for he was put in custody at the time when the trial took place?
Yes, he was in custody for about a week, and then he was let out on bail. Then we had a preliminary hearing, and then he was in custody during, no, he was allowed to go home during the trial.
And then he finally got, what was it, 10 years?
10 years.
For second-degree murder?
Yes. See,
Doesn't that make your hair stand on end? Isn't that something which gives the public reason to be doubtful about the protection?
But then take it up with the courts of justice, but by killing people still isn't going to solve that particular problem. Can we take one other tack before our time runs out? I'm concerned about the net widening aspect.
The which?
Net widening aspect of once you have execution on the books. People can see it now because we're all worked up about the Clifford Olson and about cases like Donna's. I would like to suggest that we realize a government that has capital punishment on the books this year for the Olsons and the police and all that we're discussing, next year could amend it to include threat to national security. It could include, by threat to national security, people that might be demonstrating against a cruise missile or nuclear war. It's not too far out when we're living in a world that's ready to spend $1 trillion in arms. And I'm saying that we have to take into consideration, once you put a weapon in the hands of a government, you have no control over how it's going to be used. And that's important.
Well, I disagree with you.
Well,
but
your guess is as good as mine.
I'll be back with a final selection of views of many people in the audience and members of the panel, and some questions after the break. All those in favor of capital punishment, please raise their hands. All those in favor of capital punishment, please raise their hands. Down. All those opposed, please raise their hands. We don't need a count to see that those in favor of capital punishment are in a clear majority here. All those who wish to say something on the final segment of the program, please raise their hands. Good. And I'll try and spot you as I come round. And I want you to either ask a question to the panel or say your own piece shortly and succinctly on our attempt to cover some of the aspects of the possible free vote in the House of Commons at Ottawa.
Well, I'm against capital punishment. I was a victim of violence, and this particular person got a manslaughter charge where he committed a violent murder on a girl, which I found. And I really thought it was unjust, the system which happened to this person. I mean, he's getting out in a couple of years from now, and I think I don't believe in the justice system anymore.
Are you for capital punishment?
I'm for capital
punishment. He should have been hanged.
Well, he should have been dealt with, in a manner where he just will not be out in the next couple of years.
How long ago was that?
This was about 5 years ago.
5 years ago. You have something to say, sir, I believe, don't you?
Yes, I do. I'm a taxi driver. I've heard a lot of people talking here. They're snug and secure in their jobs, but I'm afraid to go to work sometimes. The people out there are killing off taxi drivers, 7-Eleven clerks, gas station people for $50. It's all very well to sit in your offices, the lawyers and the civil libertarians and all the rest of you people, and feel safe. The policemen have guns. We've got nothing. Nothing at all.
And you'd feel a lot safer if they brought back capital punishment?
I think it would act as a deterrent.
Next one, please.
Mary Norris. My question and statement is directed to Claire Colhoun. We've heard so many views, and we know that it takes millions of dollars to keep those people imprisoned. Do you not think, Claire, that if we had proper education against crime and violence right from the time of the juvenile period and the teenagers and then the young people, so many who are unemployed. Do you not think this would perhaps lessen greatly the number of first-time murders?
Of course, because I'm not only an abolitionist in terms of capital punishment, I'm an abolitionist in terms of prisons. And I would agree that if we went to the prisons and saw the amount of money that's spent in maintaining them and the number of people, especially young people, with learning disabilities and all physical and mental handicaps, we would be addressing that problem rather than wanting to urge the
But you
the
know,
death penalty.
Claire, it's wonderful words, but you know you're whistling Dixie in the present state of the governments and the economies of Canada. They're not about to go into these
Are
kind
you
of
going to
programs.
stop fighting against poverty and against war too?
Of course I'm in favour of fighting poverty and
All right,
favour, but
well
I'm
then-
telling you what the climate is in British Columbia and Canada at the moment as far as doing anything in the short term.
But you don't follow, you try to lead.
I accept the rebuke. Your name?
Walter Gibson. I think one point that should be brought up is that 80% of the murders occur in the kitchen or the bedroom, and they're between family members or relatives and certainly people that know each other, many times under the influence of extreme alcoholism. I think over the last 20 years I've worked directly both inside and outside with capital murder people, and I would hesitate to see their lives snuffed out, because although I have much to say about the victim that I feel from my heart that they should be considered, I still feel that as a society we would be doing wrong by taking their lives.
What you're saying is two wrongs don't make a right, and the guy can be rehabilitated.
I think we had a good example in India recently. The hard line of the premier in the Golden Temple resulted in her death, and death in Ireland, Iran, wherever we want to look. It does not result in a settlement.
But you must defend yourself against terrorists. Even I would hang a terrorist.
Yeah, I agree that the legal system should be tightened up and that long terms should be imposed and served.
Sir, you had something to say.
My name is Don Morgan. Directed to Claire, it would seem that we have a few of these people have committed murders, and quite a few of them are considered insane at the time of the murder. But it seems strange that the parole board will eventually put them out on the street. They come back in again and they plead insanity again. I don't really know where we're at there.
Well, I'm the last person in the world to speak up in the name of the parole board, but I will say that here also is a big area of misunderstanding. The parole board has the power and does use it to keep people inside to not only the length of their sentence, but even beyond. So I think this is a big misunderstanding.
No, not beyond a sentence.
There's gating and there are other methods.
But gating was challenged, and as I recall, gating was not upheld in the courts, was it?
No, it was held illegal.
Gating was held illegal.
Yeah.
All they can do is let them out in mandatory supervision where they
But
must.
then they can transfer, use a mental health act and perhaps refer them
that's
to
great. Brief statement, sir?
psychiatric
Yes, I
ward.
find it very difficult to understand our society that apparently has a very high double standard, where we can send hundreds of thousands or millions of people out to die at war that are completely innocent, but we find it very difficult to put to death people that have earned their death. In other words, they pass their own sentence of death when they commit murder. All the state does is carry out.
We made that clear. Dr. Conrad, this is a matter of interest as a visiting professor from the States. Would this debate this morning just parallel almost in any way a Donahue program in San Diego?
I think it would, Mr. Webster. I think the Donahue program, so far as I have been able to listen to it, would compare very definitely with this.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a reflection of a common attitude on both sides of the borders. Is that not so? I'm not supposed to do this, but I have some people I must see just now.
Yeah.
You're Ernie Broom's son. You don't mind me mentioning that?
No.
Go ahead.
The leading practitioners of judicial murder are South Africa, Iran, and Soviet Union. I do not believe they have safer, more secure societies than we do. 200 years ago, there were 100 offenses punishable by death. They did not have safer security, more secure society then. Homicides linked to homicide rates are also linked to unemployment and poverty.
Brutality leads to brutality.
Yeah.
Sir.
John Robertson. I don't think I've heard
a compelling argument for capital punishment by anyone. What I've been hearing is an argument for a revamping of our judicial and penal systems. And I think that there would be a number of people here who are now supporting capital punishment that would soon not do so if we were to better protect society in the courts.
I think that's very well said indeed, John Robertson. One of the best statements made this morning. You would agree with it, of course, wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. Could I make a quick point about the matter of the cost of keeping criminals? It was a point used frequently by people that it costs between $20,000 and $60,000 a year to keep a criminal in custody. A murder trial involving a capital disposition of the case, that is the execution of the criminal, costs somewhere between $1 million and $2.5 million. Because the country works in a deficit budgetary situation, the interest on that money per year is about $250,000 per trial, far into the future until the time at which the deficit is paid off. It's cheaper to keep everybody in a hotel than to kill anyone.
Good point. I want one word with Mr. Dyke of the Victims of Violence. Apart from campaigning for capital punishment, is there anything else you're seeking from society, you people who have suffered so directly from the depredations of a killer?
Certainly, Jack. We want additional help for victims. Many of our victims suffer terribly. They end up almost being mental cases. In fact, I think most of them are mentally disturbed for quite some time after being involved in the violence in their families. But they're not getting any help whatsoever today, and this is what we're trying to correct.
My thanks to the members of the panel and the members of the audience, to Dr. Conrad and Michael Jackson and Dr. Van Fleet and David Williams and Claire Colhoun and
Donna.
Bernie Smith and Donna and Victims of Violence and all those others of you who came here so kindly this morning to have a free-ranging discussion on capital punishment, yea or nay, after the break. I suppose the debate this morning was predictable, and don't blame us for that. We set out to seek about 50 people with the experts, but the preponderance of the weight of opinion, quite obviously, not only in the petitions but here, is in favor of some form of return of capital punishment in, I would say, specific situations. And I want to thank all my guests again this morning and tell you that Webster will be back tomorrow. What is the time? 9 a.m. precisely.
Is that right?
No.
Yeah, but they're...
Oh, come on, come on. Would you pull the hangman's trap? Just go straight down to the Bank of BC and ask them for one free share from Edgar Kaiser. Right. Would you bring back the rope? Debate on capital punishment on Check at Midnight.
he looked in, for his 25 years, he looks in the mirror to look back at the person who is in fact a killer.
No, it's too complicated for me. Yeah, it was a good one. I'm sorry I didn't get it. I'm going to have a show of hands.
Jack, do you want my pin?
What's that?
Why do we kill people who kill people?
Can you read it? Okay, I'm ready.